Oops. Let's go back here. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Building Smart USA webinar series. This is the, I don't know if it's the first, I guess it's the first in our monthly series focusing on technical and industry topics. I am glad to have you all here today. Our first webinar is about meeting the new Building Smart USA Technical Committee. So hopefully we'll give you an overview of what's happening with the Building Smart USA chapter and do a deeper dive into the technical committee and what we're doing. Okay, so we will be recording this session. All of you should have your microphones muted, and if you have any questions, please type them in the chat, and we do have a Q&A going on afterwards. So today I'm being joined by our Executive Director, Ian Howell, and also by one of my colleagues, Dennis Sheldon, who serves on the Building Smart USA Technical Committee, but he's also one of the co-chairs for the Building Smart International Technical Room. And we work together at the international level as well. And as I said before, we're going to do, an introduction into Building Smart USA and the Technical Committee. We'll talk about some of the goals that we have and the activities that we're doing, and then hopefully get a chance to answer some of your questions down the road. Okay. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ian Howell, our Interim Executive Director.
Thanks, Jeff. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And I'm, with your permission, going to kill my video just to be sure that I save some bandwidth to have no breakup on my audio. I know you're not here to talk about the chapter as much as you are the technical committee and the work of the committee, so I'll be very brief just to remind you that the US chapter is part of Building Smart International, which is a not-for-profit organization, vendor neutral, creating open standards for architects, engineers, contractors, and owners as member companies who are working together with software vendors to come up with solutions to create open standards. On the next slide, we describe our mission as enabling the full benefits from digital methods of working for our built asset industry. These open standards that we are creating together support data sharing between the stakeholders on projects and across project phases. They support optimized work processes, and the culmination is interoperable software applications that can be used on live projects. What I wanted to show you on the next slide is the way that we've organized Building Smart USA. And that is, if we start across the bottom row, perhaps, and do a bottoms-up view, we are planning to have various industry committees, and these committees are in formation and have agendas and charters that are already developed and starting to be put into practice for roads, bridges, and tunnels, buildings, airports, and additional rooms as we see interest from industry. Those chairs of the industry committees will be part of the executive committee, and all of that work is supported by specialty committees. We have an education and professional certification committee, and you will have seen that we've already rolled out a professional certification program for Open BIM, and there are more trainings to follow. We're going to be talking a lot today about the technical committee, and Jeff will cover that in a lot of detail. And we sort of have the back office support for marketing, bookkeeping, administration, and so forth. So that's how we're organized as a chapter, and we're very eager to have any of you participate and support either at an industry level or a technical level if you so desire. The key players for our chapter, Calvin Cam, who many of you know, is our chair. I'm in an interim executive director role as we get the new chapters up and running. Will Sharp is leading the Roads and Bridges Committee. Cindy Baldwin is leading the Airports Committee together with Adam Rendek from DPR, who's our co-chair of the International Airport Room. Tony Ranella is in charge of our professional certification program, and of course, Jeffrey's leading the technical efforts. So just a reminder as to how all this comes together on the next slide. If we start at the top of this triangle, this is industry-led. It's all about use cases and points of pain that are a set of requirements as to how we can improve our industry with digital ways of working. If you go to the bottom left, we take those user requirements and we run them through our BSI standards development process. And that's where we mobilize our international community of domain experts to look at ways of solving those points of pain. And then to the bottom right, we work closely in conjunction with global software vendors, because ultimately our aim is not to publish a standard, but to have the industry standards that are being developed implemented in commercial software applications, so that you can all use them on projects to real benefit and advantage. And I've got just one more slide before I hand back to Jeff, and that's really just identifying our role. We are one of 25 international chapters, and our specific US focus is to be an international partner, to recruit industry participation, support, involvement, and sponsorship in the open standards development work that's being done internationally, to engage US industry in those projects, to give their important input, and most importantly, to make sure that the work that's being done is directly applicable to US industry and to US projects. So thanks again for joining us. And Jeff, I'm going to hand back to you to do a bit of a deep dive on technical committee, please.
Great. Thank you, Ian. So Ian showed you the larger organization of the chapter, and with this, I'm going to go into a little more detail about the technical committee. So when we first put the chapter together, we really wanted to make sure that we addressed a lot of the same kind of user programs and sort of support or specialty committees that International also offers. And this allows us to sort of create the basis for taking those concerns from the national level and directly plugging into those committees or those rooms at the international level. And so with the technical committee, I'm being joined by Dennis Sheldon, Aaron Costin, Connor Christian, Michael Kalla. We'll introduce them in a second. And as a part of that committee, we want to sort of focus our attention on projects and concerns from a technical perspective. When we look at BSI and we talk about developing standards, part of it is actually looking at workflows and looking at user requirements, user needs in order to have an interoperability solution. The other side of that, of course, is there has to be some type of technical execution. And at the international level, there's many things, there's many frameworks, there's many of the technical standards that are created and in place for everyone to use. And at the national level, what we want to do is provide some means of executing for our national partners. So whether they are software vendors that are strictly dealing with the national US market, or they're end users that have a high technical capability and want to implement these standards, we want to be able to support them here. So the two working groups that we currently have are the US Data Dictionary, which is going to be led by Aaron Costin. And the US Data Dictionary is essentially a content and agency for a national dictionary in the US that plugs into the buildingSMART's data dictionary service. And we'll talk about that in a little bit too. In addition, we'll have what we call, well, this should say solution provider group, not software provider group. We want to include both hardware and software development and developers and companies in the US market that we feel can really benefit from OpenBIM and from interoperability standards. And as I said before, it's more than just software. If you look at all the things that are being done in terms of robotics and AR and LiDAR and photogrammetry and everything, these are integrated solutions. And so we want to approach it in that way. And the software provider group gives us an opportunity to really bring all of those vendors together, begin to talk to one another, and cooperate at the level of creating interoperability solutions for the industry and our customers. Just a brief introduction to all of the current members of the technical committee. So Dennis, you want to say anything?
Sure. I hope you can hear me. It looks like my camera is muted by the coordinator. So sorry, you can't see me, but it's okay. So as Jeff mentioned, I have kind of dual roles. One is as a member of the technical committee for buildingSMART US, and then I serve as one of the two directors for the technical room for buildingSMART International. And I guess I would just say that second, kind of the point that Jeff made, which is the kind of the state of the art and the workflows that we're focused on now are no longer just about exchanging BIM models between BIM modeling software. There's this explosion of really interesting connectivity and convergence across applications, both file-based, desktop-based, and cloud-based, that span from IoT devices at the low level, at the smallest level, to GIS at another scale, at the largest scale. And the opportunity for buildingSMART to develop standards, but also frameworks that can connect these widely disparate, but also integratable formats and use cases into kind of a network of applications is one of the really exciting things that's in front of us. And so I think particularly for application developers, it's an exciting time to be working with buildingSMART to establish those kind of connectivities around the larger workflows and the larger built systems. And I think you'll see over the course of this presentation, and hopefully as you continue to participate with us, that there's really interesting ways to engage in that spectrum of connectivity, and it's kind of a whole new world for buildingSMART to be kind of a core contributor to orchestrating that network of connectivity. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Jeff.
Thanks, Dennis. And I believe we have Aaron online with us too.
Thanks, Jeff. Hi, I'm Aaron Costin, assistant professor at the University of Florida. I will be serving as the chair of the data dictionary, and my role is kind of mimics what I've been doing recently with industry and gathering industry knowledge and putting them in forms that are more usable to software. So I'll be assisting with the other groups to make sure that their data gets into the schema, as well as working with the industry groups in collecting that data to be put in.
Great, thank you, Aaron. Micah or Connor, are you guys online? Okay. So I'm really happy to have these four involved with the technical room. As you can see, there's a diversity of experiences here across the industry, different types of roles. I think all of us have experiences that are both in terms of practice and implementation, as well as on the software side and the more research and even academic side of things. And hopefully we can work towards even recruiting more and more people to be a part of this. And so this is just four of us, and it's a big industry, and there are a lot of players out there, and we need more leaders. We need a diversity of people with different backgrounds and technical experience and and domains. I mean, for our group, you're looking at GIS, civil engineering, and architecture. And we want to hear from those other domains, whether it's facilities management or it's on the contracting side of things, it's in product manufacturing, that technical expertise is also brought to the table, especially as we begin to address a lot of the issues that we'll talk about later in the presentation. And it's not just private companies or software companies or research institutions. We also need architecture firms, engineering firms, contractors, people with technical experience that want to be involved, in how we execute and how we support the implementation of standards at BSI, and even how we support the development of them. So, currently buildingSMART USA has a number of members and partners on the technical side. This is a list of the current software companies and organizations and even end user companies that have really indicated that from their buildingSMART International membership, they also want to be a part of the US chapter. And so we'll be working with them as we explore these initiatives as part of the software provider group, our solutions provider group, but also in connecting with groups like GS1, OGC, and Digital Twin as we explore some of the topics that we'll be talking about today and in the future. And then there's groups like and companies like HOK who are using the technology, are implementing these standards, and have some very influential and very capable technical resources that can help us understand the best ways to move in the future directions and also support what we have now. And HOK has been involved with buildingSMART International almost since the beginning. And so we really value their input here at the chapter level. Okay, so we talked a bit about what does the technical committee look like, but what are we trying to do here? And a large part of this is really connecting with what is happening at the global level. So buildingSMART International itself is really sort of the owner of these standards, and but they rely on the global community in order to create them. It is a consensus effort, and every chapter that's out there has the ability then to directly interact with the process in order to provide input on the things that are happening, both in terms of supporting existing standards, but also building new ones. And I think it's important to see is that things are changing. As Dennis mentioned before, we understand at buildingSMART today that technology and the use of technology has evolved significantly in the last 10 years. And our industry in and of itself, the built asset industry, is significantly behind the rest of computing when it comes to the implementation of technologies and standards. So we're playing catch up really fast, but we don't want to just play catch up. We also want to plow forward too. And if we look at the way modern computing works with schemas and technologies and standards that essentially are very web-centric, right? We're no longer talking just about a desktop-centric world, but we're looking at devices that are all connected together via the web and providing the ability to exchange data and manipulate data and use data in those different ways. How do we address that from a buildingSMART perspective? We have been developing new services at the international level. So the data dictionary being one of them. We'll talk a little bit about that more. The use case management tool, which is a platform that is meant to capture and catalog all of the potential use cases for BIM and for interoperability based on our needs. And this is a service that buildingSMART offers for people to sign up and begin to collect their requirements. And then there's a standardized process of documenting all of those. And then you have the ability to export all of that and share that information with others. And in addition, we're sort of moving from the old means of developing the technical documentation, the technical standards, from bespoke solutions and very sort of customized ways of working into utilizing platforms like GitHub and Travis continuous integration tools in order to be able to rapidly develop new capabilities and even new extensions for the IFC standard and others. And this allows us to really explore standards, not just from core technology like IFC and BCF and OpenCD, but also the application of those to use cases like fire safety and FM handover and occupant movement analysis. And how all of those can then leverage not only those core standards, but then other applications of things like IFC JSON and product data templates. So we're really looking forward into how buildingSMART will take the industry forward. Now, as I said before, there is a technical roadmap that buildingSMART published last year, and it really looks at addressing these kinds of things where how can we move to the right hand of the scale? How can we get more adoption of the technical standards by making sure that we're making good use of the technology that's already being used in computing today. So, I think a lot of times when people look at IFC for the first time, their eyes get really wide. They let out a big sigh and they're like, where do I start? What am I doing? What's involved here? And we recognize that. And we've already made some efforts to say, okay, well, how do we make this easier for software developers to implement and use? And what are the mechanisms in which they're developing today? And as we said before, with web development or web-based functionality and services really being the core of most of the development happening today, what can we then do to enable those new applications and those new workflows to occur in a web-based world? And so moving away from sort of the way we used to do things and moving in directions that are good computer science and good computer engineering for the modern era. So with that, Dennis and I are going to touch on some of the things that are currently going on and some of the things that we're looking at doing in the future within buildingSMART USA and buildingSMART International. So one of the major efforts that was started a couple of years ago was this idea of open CDE. So with all of the development and introductions of new common data environments within the industry, so things like Trimble Connect and Autodesk's BIM 360 and Nemetschek's BIM Plus and even other common data environments like Dropboxes and drives and things that we don't typically think of as industry specific. There's an idea of how do I share information across all of these CDEs for a particular project? Because we know that especially for large projects, that information, whether it's models or it's model based in some way or it has some connection to the project, isn't always necessarily captured in one common data environment, right? The engineer may have theirs, the contractor may have theirs, the architect may have theirs. And rather than forcing everyone onto one platform, just like we talk about IFC, not forcing everyone to use one platform in the authorship of data, why don't we look at the opportunity to connect these data environments, these common data environments, in a way that is smart and useful for anyone, any of the stakeholders anywhere in a project. So the first work's already been done, the foundation API, and really looking at things like authentication, authorization, what are the conventions of communication between different CDEs. And so that standard has been introduced and voted on by the standards committee at buildingSMART International. Alongside that, we even have an update to BCF, the BIM collaboration format. So that's now been revisioned up to version 3.0. We'll see some more announcements and we'll see some more information come from buildingSMART on that. And for those of you that aren't familiar with BCF, BCF is that communication standard that's based on the model and the ability to share issues or comments or assign different actions based on the context of the model. One of the new projects that just kicked off is the document API project. And this is having the ability to query and interact with documents, and documents sort of a loose term, a bucket for, whether it's models or PDFs or whatever that may be, but to be able to query and locate and interact with documents across multiple CDEs. So that's a first step. It's an exciting one. It's not it's not a quick and easy one, but I think it's also one of those low-hanging fruit solutions that says, we get this done and we get the vendors to implement it. That takes a big step towards being able to have more data at the fingertips of all of the stakeholders in a project. The next one that hasn't kicked off yet and we're still working on is the property exchange API. So the ability to, say, query objects within a model or data points within a model, and then being able to figure out what kind of actions we can take on them is another step forward. And this is just the beginning of a framework that could include other possible API standards and other types of communication and workflows that would all fall under this idea of open CDE. As I mentioned before, there's also the buildingSMART data dictionary and US data dictionary. And for those of you that aren't familiar with the data dictionaries, so the idea is to essentially create a authoritative terms and definitions that are used in the industry. And at the same time of having those terms and definitions, you're also mapping or linking to different schemas, different classification systems, so that when you say, oh, what is a column? Well, what does a column look like in IFC? What does a column look like in land XML or some other schema? What does a column look like in uniformat? What does a column look like in master format? And then having the ability to map across standards for these different terms. And what we're working on right now is a project for US infrastructure that says, okay, well, can we start a US data dictionary with the needs of the infrastructure industry, especially as applies to bridges in the US? And working with members of AASHTO, the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, NSBA, we've begun working, and Aaron's been, Costin's been really working hard at trying to define what that initial data dictionary looks like. And then what buildingSMART USA wants to do is then act as the keeper of that data dictionary and become the agency which then does the administration of that data dictionary on the buildingSMART services. We will be having a webinar, I believe it's August, that will be diving deeper into this whole concept of the data dictionary and the US data dictionary. So please be in the lookout for the announcement for that, and we'll get into more details about that. Dennis, you want to talk about IFC JSON?
Yeah, cool. Do you mind just really quickly going back to that spectrum slide of the bespoke versus the the red versus the red to blue? I just want to make one point on that. So, okay, great. Yeah, I mean, I think this is a little bit hard to parse, but if you look at the left side, I guess this is sort of where we've come from. And I think, people who are on this webinar, I would imagine recognize the value of having an open standard for the exchange of BIM data between applications. But the legacy of IFC so far has been that it is a kind of a fairly esoteric set of technologies, and it really hasn't evolved along with the rest of the internet and the web. So it's been a fairly opaque technology, and it's been very difficult for non-gurus, people who haven't really devoted their careers to understanding this technology, the technology under the hood of interoperability, to get into. So one of the ambitions of the IFC JSON program specifically, and more generally, all the things that Jeff has been talking about, is a move to open up that world to the point where people who aren't even necessarily programming experts, but have some familiarity with the prevalent data that's the kind of the underpinnings of the web, can interact with it. So things like where he mentions APIs, these are now moving to things like the REST APIs that are part of URL, the URL browser locations that show up in a web browser. again, these technologies now are much more accessible to, I wouldn't say necessarily lay people, but sort of to technologists who are familiar with the state of the art of current technology. And technology has been getting, I'd say, just generally, it's richer, but at some level, it's more accessible, right? So on the left, without getting into details, is the first view, just a glimpse of what an IFC JSON version of a BIM model looks like. And if you've ever seen the IFC version, the IFC Express version, I think it's compared to this, it's illegible. But here at least you can see the basic data elements of a particular object, which in this case may be a wall, and it just shows its metadata, the name value pairs of parameters and values, and that organization again is much more human readable, but it's also much more machine readable, and you don't need very specific kind of toolkits to read this stuff. Chrome and all web browsers will read this directly. So you can actually open up the debugger in Chrome and start querying the BIM data, in this JSON format, if you read it in. So, so that's kind of the ambition of IFC JSON, is one, to convert the underlying schema and data encoding to something that is, much more modern, but also much more ubiquitous. Pretty much every web application reads JSON, and there's tons of tooling out there. A lot of it's free, a lot of it's open source to be able to manage that. So in the middle is an initiative we started working on. It's relatively new, and this is using an application called, it's an open source visual programming node code platform called Node-RED, which is part of that Node.js, JSON, Chrome stack that's underlying all web and web services technologies. And just to say that we are now starting to develop these kind of drag and droppable packages of services where you can just create connectors, and those connectors can tie into, can read and write JSON and transform it into the data that you want, and generate and then produce, and then stream that to other services. So, so we're just, in addition to developing the standards, we're developing some of the tooling, or at least aggregating the tooling from other places that allow you to kind of easily connect any application to any other application. And on the right is just a really interesting kind of initiative called sort of, ironically, IFC.js, which is a JavaScript-based web viewer. That's again open source by some folks, being developed as an open source project, where you can read both traditional Express-based IFC, but also it's just one of the applications that is connecting into this network of very lightweight readers, writers, transformers, streamers that are communicating IFC through this JSON format. So I guess I'll leave it at that, except to say that these other initiatives Jeff is mentioning, OpenCDE, CDE, the BSDD, Data Dictionary, these are all web services and web-enabled protocols that, again, if you know anything about kind of modern software development that's web-enabled, these will be very familiar and won't require a ton of learning to get up to speed. So that's one of the kind of strategies to making this technology much more accessible and to expanding the community and thereby creating a higher value through this kind of network of innovation.
Great.
That's all I have, Jeff.
Okay. Thank you, Dennis. Another thing that's currently going on, and in fact, we had a webinar this morning, is IFC 4.3. So it is a major update to the IFC standard. It is expanding the scope of IFC beyond buildings to now include much, if not most, of what we consider the built environment. So this includes infrastructure like bridges and roads and railways and all of the other things that are associated in terms of tunnels. There's ports and waterways, and then things like the geotechnical and alignment concepts that are necessary for all of these to exist. And the webinar this morning is really talking about how they're wrapping up the development work for IFC 4.3 and plan to then submit the schema, the candidate standard, to ISO so that it goes through the ISO process and becomes an ISO standard by 2022. And I think this is really exciting. It bridges, it builds on the legacy that we had before with IFC 2X3 and IFC 4. Obviously, there will be some changes, but I think it's a step in the right direction. The IFC 4.3 schema will be used by the U.S. infrastructure industry initially with bridges and structures to facilitate interoperability at that level. And many of the European partners at buildingSMART International have indicated, they have projects already underway for things like roads and railways. So this is something to really be on the lookout for over the next few months. I'm going to show an example of how this technology can then be applied. So, we talk about not just the technology, but we also talk about the use cases and the applications of the technology. And one of those that has recently come up is the facility management handover. So many of you might be familiar with the original FM handover standard from BSI 2009. You also have COBE that was developed here in the US, which is looking at this idea of handing over information from the project delivery process to the owners to be used for operations. And this new project is the development of model view definitions and exchanges based on IFC 4.3, based on all new mappings to IFC 4.3, and creating a new framework around FM handover exchanges so that we can define a framework once, and then we can begin to develop very quickly multiple use cases or multiple exchanges. In this case, the first use case will be equipment maintenance. So, being able to define what are all the necessary data points for getting information about equipment. Where is it at? What is it? What are all of the warranty and other types of data points that are necessary for an owner operator to move forward with that data. And the idea is to take this to the international level because we want to create a level of consistency that the vendors can more easily support, and at the same time provide a flexibility so that countries or smaller jurisdictions can even create in a modular way more requirements or exchange requirements that may be required on top of this basic core or these other basic international MVDs. So I think this is a really exciting project going forward, and if you'd like more information, please reach out. As we mentioned before, another thing that we're supporting, and I'm personally supporting it because I'm a part of the project, the HDR is leading an effort to develop BIM standards for infrastructure, in this case, focused on bridges and associated structures for the US industry, and really focusing on the exchange of information from the design process to construction and fabrication. So what is that information that is captured during the design process that then is handed over to contractors and fabricators and detailers to begin their process? And this is a 5-year project. We're in year 3 right now. We have all the major vendors involved right now. Many of them are also involved in the IFC 4.3 development work. And so, with their efforts to date, we're moving this forward and developing exchanges based on IFC for infrastructure. And hopefully this is, the first step of, many steps in which we look at not just, bridges, but we look at all of infrastructure in the US. Dennis, you want to talk a bit about the future strategic thinking? Or did I lose him?
Sorry, no, I'm on. Yeah, sorry. So yeah, I think just to say, I think you can add on also this, but the idea really is that we want to start with this kind of core set of conventions on the left, which really at the bottom left, this is the kind of the legacy of IFC, which is standards about things like geometry, things like, you know, data types, all that kind of low level, you know, organization and knowledge that needs to be part of any sort of BIM or geometry or building based shared conventions, right? And then moving up, you know, that stack, there's more and more opportunity to kind of spread out and be flexible in terms of extending these shared conventions to things, as you said, as Jeff said, like things like infrastructure that wasn't part of the IFC and buildingSMART agenda, but it's been a very natural extension. And we want to use that kind of core set of conventions and understandings, but expand it increasingly outward to support more and more constituencies and more communities. So that's really sort of the strategy, and then also to keep that kind of knowledge about you know, what's in a project, but be also flexible about how it's described, because we know that you know, that technology isn't going to stand still, and we need to kind of be able to keep that shared understanding, but also be able to evolve the technology underpinning. So that is, I think, really the kind of the core of the strategy going forward. Jeff, I don't know if you want to add anything, or I think you want. There's an. You could go to the next slide.
Yeah. So you know, we right now it's loosely termed IFC 5, and you know, it's just thinking, you know, everything that we've experienced over the last 20 years is how do we move it to the next level. So IFC JSON is a good way. How do we think of not just one or two serializations, but how do we think of multiple serializations? How do we look at a more flexible schema structure that allows, you know, has really core true interoperability no matter what kind of file you have, but also then allows for flexibility to expand the schema on a case-by-case basis, and you know, and still have that ability to read the data. One application of that, and one thing that we're currently working on at buildingSMART International is, and in fact Dennis is working on through his work at CASE at Rensselaer, is this idea of BIM and building energy modeling. I think, you know, many of us have been involved in this in one way or another. I think we all recognize that it's continuing to be a struggle, is to figure out how to do this and how to do it effectively. I think there's been a lot of great efforts on the US side through the Department of Energy, through institutions like CASE at Rensselaer, and through others. And then in Europe, in dealing with a lot of other academic research that's going on, but also a lot of the Horizon 2020 projects that are trying to figure out what's the best way to do this. You know, how do we take a use case like building energy modeling and really make use of the data that we're generating in BIM, and not just be a one-way street, but essentially have that interconnection between the two, so that the work that's being done on the simulation and analysis end has a direct impact on the design and even future, that, you know, not just design, but also the throughout project delivery and even in project operations. Next slide here. So a couple of other big topics that we're working on right now, and that, you know, we're going to choose to really address here at the chapter level 2 are digital twins, and, you know, directly related, this idea of GIS and BIM interconnectivity. Just like with BIM and building energy modeling, you know, there's been a lot of talk and effort about this, connecting these two contexts of GIS and BIM. And, you know, what are the use cases for that, and what are the best ways of doing that? And I think, you know, one interesting, you know, application of that is this idea of digital twins. Is if we look at the built environment and the ability to essentially create a digital doppelganger of the built environment, what are the ways that all of that information can be leveraged, not just in terms of in its own digital context, but also in the real world context. So things like IoT, and, you know, how is the digital twin able to affect or be affected by the tools in analysis and controls within that sort of connection or paradigm of the analog and the digital twins. And we will be having a webinar in September that talks about this idea of open BIM and open GIS. So please check that out. So as we wrap up here, I just wanted to, before we take questions, you know, the big thing is we want people to be engaged. So, you know, we have the chapter, we're up and running. We want to get more people involved so we can begin to pursue a lot of these projects and these ideas. We want to make connections to people. We want to start plugging people not into what's just happening at the national level, but what's happening at the international level. So for organizations, we're really, you know, encouraging you to reach out to us and become a member of buildingSMART USA, or become a multinational or international member of buildingSMART International. And as a multinational or international member, you know, you also become a member of buildingSMART USA. As I mentioned before, for the technical committee, but for the chapter in general, we would like more people participating in buildingSMART USA. And, you know, whether that's just being a part of a committee or part of an industry group, or you want to actually lead that industry group, please reach out to us, contact Ian and let us know your interest. As we talked about for the solutions provider is, you know, we really want to have an active a national group of solutions providers. If I looked at some of the other chapters in some of the other countries, it's really heartening to see, especially in places like Norway and Japan, where they have very active vendor groups. And they get together and they talk about these issues and they figure out ways to support each other, both at the local level, but also to the international level. And we also want to provide an inroads to having that connection to BSIs, what they call the General Assembly of Implementers now. So how can you make connections to the world at large for those of you that may have been really just focusing on the US? And more of that information can be found on the buildingSMART forums. So forums.buildingsmart.org, you register and you'll see that there's a place for the developers, and we also have a chapter category there as well. And so wrapping up, you know, this is the first of the monthly webinar series. The remaining ones will be the second Wednesday of each month. And the next one will be Open BIM and Owner's Perspective in July. And as I said, the Open BIM, Open GIS one is in September. For the technical series, we're going to kick off the US Data Dictionary with a webinar in August. And then we'll sort of circle back around and talk about IFC and some of the things that we talked about in more detail. What does IFC look like today and how is it going to work? And then, you know, what is the potential for tomorrow? And then I think in December, really wrap up the year with this idea of some of the things that Dennis pointed out is if we if we learn from our past and really look to what's computing's doing in general, what can we do? Well, you know, what is possible out there and what does that possibly look like? And please, you know, stay connected. So whether it's on the website at buildingsmartusa.org or via LinkedIn, you can find us on LinkedIn. We'll be providing lots of information, but, you know, being both through both of those channels to everyone that's interested. Okay, so with that, Dan, do we have any questions?
Jeff, while Dan's doing that, maybe you could go back a couple of slides, please, where you talk about the webinars. And I wanted to just highlight the webinar on the right, back one more, which is we are co-sponsoring together with TRB, the Transport Research Board, and HEAP, the Highway Engineering Exchange Program, a series of BIM for infrastructure webinars. This is in support of AASHTO's resolutions to adopt IFC as a national standard for 3D engineering data for the state DOTs, who are their member organizations, as they adopt BIM and as they aspire to use building models as a legal document in lieu of contract document sets. and also have building models as part of their vision become available for asset information management for project lifecycle operations and management. So there are some exciting things happening on the horizontal construction side, taking advantage of the new road, bridge, and rail standards, and some of the new MVDs around alignment and so forth. So there's a lot happening in that area of horizontal construction. And rather than buildingSMART doing direct communications with you all, we are integrated and working with the BIM for infrastructure folks, the AASHTO committees, AASHTOware as a subsidiary software developer for AASHTO, and very involved in that community. So you'll see not just the vertical industry BIM modeling players like Autodesk, Trimble, Bentley, Nemetschek, and others at the table in these discussions, but increasingly vendors who are also supporting horizontal construction. And again, a lot of information being shared by AASHTO and by TRB and HEAP that we are helping with and co-sponsoring. So just want to put that on your radar, in addition to our own work, which Jeff articulated on the left. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Yeah, thank you, Ian. So a couple questions here. So Jag, did I correctly hear that that buildingSMART USA will develop and maintain a US data dictionary? And if so, how do public owner operators partake in the future updates? What are the mechanics that might be involved? So that's a great segue into what I mentioned before, is attending the August technical series webinar. And we'll talk more in depth about that. But the intent and the proposal that was put forth in front of buildingSMART International, buildingSMART USA, in front of the Transportation Pool Fund and AASHTO, is to create a working group. And let's see if I can scroll back there really quickly. Within the technical committee. And the USDD essentially would be a group of all of the stakeholders who have content that needs to be a part of the data dictionary. And so our starting point is using the BIM for Bridges and Structures project to create the initial set of content. And then over time, through the USDD, Aaron would then get more of this information from all of the different stakeholders. So from all of these different organizations, and we can go back to this slide, AASHTO, FHWA, from the different associations for the different like PCI and ACI and AIC, from all these different organizations, to make sure that we have a really good national standard for a data dictionary. And then the chapter would be responsible then for interacting with the buildingSMART service and making sure that the information is there, it's stored, any editing that needs to be done. And then we'll create the procedures within the chapter and within that working group to review and maintain and all of that information that's necessary. And I think related to that, as a part of OpenBIM, OpenGIS, are there other international standards, specifically GIS standards from OGC, being considered for building the US data dictionary? And that is exactly one of the points of having this data dictionary, is you have the ability then to map and link to other standards within the dictionary itself. So I believe buildingSMART has already been looking at the InfraGML and the LandXML as other possible quote unquote classifications that are within the buildingSMART data dictionary. And that's really what it's there for, right? And by providing the service, really, what buildingSMART is saying is, well, we can't centrally handle all of the content. So instead, if they provide the service, that allows all of us in the different levels, different organizations, either at the national level, organizational level, whether you're a company, a contractor, an owner like the GSA or Statsbig or whatever, to then, make sure that your information is within the data dictionary and then can be used by vendors. And what the data dictionary service is providing is then an API for vendors to hook their tools up to the data dictionary so that you begin to capture that information inside of your tools. And yeah, and then from Bill East, how will the technical committee support the development of new and updated MVDs, such as the facilities management handover and equipment maintenance MVD? I think our intent is to make sure that we have, from the national level, all of the players, the important players that are a part of it, that we get them to the table as a part of the international project. But then also provide an opportunity either through more webinars or through conferences for the information about the development of these MVDs and these standards to make everyone aware of them, whether you're an end user or you're a vendor software developer. So we want to make sure that these efforts are well supported, that people are aware of them, and that they have an opportunity to participate and support them. For the FM handover one specifically, we are looking for project sponsors for that to pay for the work for the development work to be done. And those sponsors become an integral part of developing the requirements necessary for developing that framework, and also the requirements for equipment maintenance, MVD. Another question: what are the thoughts on creating the BIM data hub or platform that will not only host all these APIs, but also other technical stack artifacts? So buildingSMART International has a GitHub site, website. And in fact, I think I can actually switch over to that. So if we look at this today, GitHub, hopefully everyone can see my browser. You'll see that there are a number of these projects that are already there. So if I look at, there's the IFC development, there's the JSON project, there's the different BCF projects, there's the Foundation API. So all of this is currently being hosted on buildingSMART's GitHub presence. And this is how they're running things at BSI. And as chapters begin to develop more independent things, we're working with buildingSMART International right now to determine what's the best way to handle that. Do we handle it through the international hub, or should we be creating chapter hubs? I don't think we have a great answer on that right now. But these are all open. Anybody should be able to see them. But any work, of course, that you want to do, any commenting and all that is, get a GitHub account, and you'll be able to dive in and see what's going on. Examples, this is the next gen IFC. You can see where, you can actually begin to add issues and talk about what are the things you'd like to see in a future version of IFC. And as I mentioned before, of course, forums to communicate, and then there's also the International Technical Resources site to get more information on what's happening. And I think we've just about run out of time. There's one quick question: is there a priority on the industries? Again, I think the reason that we're focusing initially on bridges is because we have a project there in which a data dictionary is being developed for that particular project. But it's, the intent is to include it for all industries. So, we look forward to having input from, all the stakeholders in the built asset industry, no matter whether it's road or bridges or tunnels and rail and, buildings of different types and sizes, and, all of those different domains and stakeholders. So thank you again. A reminder that this has been recorded, and we will make the recordings available. You'll see the recordings on the buildingSMART USA website. You'll have a link to those. You'll also have a link to some of the other webinars that we'll see later this month and in the future months. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining in and being with us here today. And thank you to my colleagues for presenting as well.